In this project I'm going to show you how I carve Celtic letters, in particular this mantelpiece with the word Ardnamara, or the words Ardnamara in the middle, which means house by the sea, and that's the name of the house where this mantle will go. Celtic lettering, very old. You can find lots of examples on the internet and in books like the Book of Kells or so on, but I also have my own book here, Letter Carving, and it does have a font, an alphabet that I've made up myself that carves really well. So it's a good carvable Celtic lettering style. And also in the book you'll find I've used it for a bowl around the edge. It works very well for circular layouts. Anyway, I'll show you how to do this, and I'm going to use it as an opportunity to go through the basics of letter carving and show how the letter carving techniques are common through all letter styles, and you'll find that this letter style, the Celtic alphabet, is a really nice and easy one to carve. So where does letter carving start? Where does your lettering start? Well, it doesn't begin when you start putting the chisel into the wood. It starts with the layout. The layout means the arrangement, the spacing and the shape of the letters. And that's really, really important. In fact, in some ways it's more important than the actual carving, because if you have good layout, it will carry not very good carving. But no matter how good your carving, if your layout isn't right, it will still look wrong. So the layout consists of two aspects, one of which is the letter forms themselves, in other words, what the letters look like. And you have to be able to get those equal and the same, so that two A's look like two A's and not one bold or one italic. And then you need to understand how they work as a family. So do study your letter form, whether it's Celtic, whether it's verse or whatever, and draw and be very familiar with how these letters are made up. Then the second aspect, besides the actual shape of the letters, is how they're spaced. In other words, the actual gaps in between. So what you need to do is, and I'll show you what I did here, is you start off with your drawn letters and you start finding the different spaces in between. In other words, the gap between this A and this R will be different between the A and the R on this side, for example. So you need to sort of work this backwards and forwards, and I'll show you an exercise in a minute to help with that. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't just use a computer, I drew them out and I literally cut and paste them, because your eye is very, very sensitive. So this was a second version, and I did 3 or 4 versions, and eventually I came up with my final version, which is this one. And then I arranged those in a line, and again the lines are as important as individual words. So that now is my final drawing. Now I could draw that directly onto the wood, but in this case, and what I normally do these days, is I just glue it straight onto the wood. I'm using very thin paper, so it really doesn't affect it very much. Before I do that though, let me show you this exercise that is very good for getting your eye into the spacing. This exercise works with every alphabet. Just take a couple of letters like this, cut them out, and put them together like this, like so. Now if you move one away like this from the other, you see the gap in between changes, obviously. But there is a point where the letters feel very tight together and a point where they feel far apart. And there's a sort of optical point where they feel quite nice, comfortable to read. Now this space in between varies according to the shape of the letter. For example, if we swap those around, we now have a curve and a curve instead of 2 straight lines. So again, that is slightly different. So when you've got several letters together, like so, the gap between these 2 letters, which is like a little crevasse, 2 straights, might be different from the letters between the space between these 2 letters. So it's not a matter of a mathematical amount, it's what it appears like. So again, you might have 2 A's together, so you have a different sort of curve. Or again, you might have the big capital, and how does that capital work when it's like this? 2 curves as opposed to a capital with a straight. So that's what you can play with. Play around and you'll find that there's some point in which when you position these letters together and you adjust them, especially by squinting through half-closed eyes rather, you'll be able to find that this feeling of the space in between is equal, and that's what you're going for, what they call an overall colour to the arrangement. Once we've got our layout, we can transfer the drawing to the wood, and I'm going to show you how I transfer the paper drawing as opposed to drawing it directly on. So what I've done here, the first thing I've done is I found the centre of the letters, and I simply did this by flipping it over and finding quite literally the middle of the letters. So it doesn't come in the middle of the words, but it comes at some point where the letters are arranged. Now again, you need to look at that when you put it on the wood, and just to make sure that feels comfortable. But usually that's about right. So I prepared my wood, and I've marked my midline here. And then what I did was I positioned this on the wood very carefully until I found where I wanted this letter to be, these letters to be, in relation to the top and the bottom. In this case, we've got a very narrow strip, so it's quite important to be quite exact. And then for this letter set here, the most important line is this one, which is the one on which most of these letters, this middle letter, sits. The big letters are above and below, and then these smaller letters which tuck in the middle. So I drew that line on the wood here. So that's what that line is, and there's our middle line. Then on my piece of paper, I cut through, as you can see, little V cuts here that allow me to see this line in the paper and to line that paper on it. So I can line my paper very accurately using these little gaps in the paper here. So once I've made that, those decisions and made those cuts, the next stage is to just take some glue and put the glue on the back of the paper and stick that down, and that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, so here's the paper now glued onto the wood, so we're ready to start carving. But before we do, there's one more thing I want to say to you. The design, the laying out of the letters on the wood, that can take as long, if not longer, than the carving itself. It's very important to understand that. And as a carver, carving for yourself, you still need to be prepared to take that time. And of course, if you're costing work for somebody else, you have to make allowances for that. Anyway, that's all done now, so we can get on with the carving.